All right, today we're cracking open a secret case file. It's a story that was hidden for decades, tucked away inside a stack of personal letters. And these aren't just any letters. They're the private, intimate correspondence between Sigmund Freud and his closest friend, Wilhelm Fliess. They basically document the birth of psychoanalysis, moment by moment. And you know, this entire story was almost lost to history.
First, you have to appreciate just how close we came to never knowing any of this. It's pretty wild. Freud actually destroyed the letters Fliess sent to him, but lucky for us, his letters to Fliess survived. They were literally rescued from being burned in 1936 by a psychoanalyst who also happened to be a princess, Marie Bonaparte. But even then, for decades, all the public got was a heavily censored, chopped up version. It took until 1985, can you believe it, for the complete, unfiltered story to finally come out.
So, let's set the stage. Who are our main characters? Well, in one corner, you've got Sigmund Freud, a total radical thinker in Vienna, feeling pretty isolated by the mainstream medical world for his, let's say, unconventional ideas. And in the other corner, Wilhelm Fliess, a successful doctor over in Berlin who became Freud's #1 confidant. Their friendship was, well, it was incredibly intense. Freud saw Fliess as the only person on his intellectual level, the one guy he could share his absolute wildest theories with. He even called their meetings congresses, like these epic summits where they just hash out these revolutionary ideas. You have to understand, for this critical window of time, Fliess was the guy, the sounding board for the ideas that would literally change how we think about the mind. Okay, so picture Freud as a detective. He's got this massive cold case on his hands. What in the world is causing neurosis and hysteria? And as he's listening to his patients, he starts to notice this startling pattern, this one clue that he thinks is going to blow the whole case wide open. His first big lead? He called it the seduction theory. And on the surface, the idea seems pretty straightforward, right? Freud was convinced his patient's suffering wasn't just some made-up thing in their heads. He believed it was rooted in a real, actual, traumatic event of sexual abuse that happened to them when they were very, very young. So how did he think this worked? Well, he basically imagined it like a delayed action bomb. He came up with this two-step process. Step 1, the trauma happens when you're a little kid, but you're too young to really process it sexually, so the memory just gets tucked away, dormant. Then, step 2, boom. Years later, you hit puberty and some totally unrelated event triggers that old memory. But now, your brain has a whole new context for it. It's too much to handle, so the mind just shoves it down, represses it, and that act of repression is what creates the neurotic symptom. And for a while there, Freud was totally sold. He thought, this is it, I've solved it. But as he kept gathering more and more stories from his patients, his big theory started to get shaky. The pieces just weren't fitting together anymore. He started getting plagued by this really nagging, devastating doubt. I mean, he was hearing these stories of childhood seduction from practically all of his patients, and he started to think, wait a minute, could this really be happening to that many people? And that led him to this absolutely terrifying question. What if these stories, what if they aren't real memories at all? What if there's something else?
And then comes the moment everything changes. It's all in this one, now legendary letter to Fliess from September of 1897. In it, he just drops this absolute bombshell. He writes, "Let me tell you the great secret. I no longer believe in my neurotica." And just like that, the theory that was the entire foundation of his work was gone.
So, what happened? Why the complete 180? Well, his letters lay it all out. It was a whole cascade of doubts. For one thing, the number of accused perpetrators, who are often the patient's own fathers, it just seems statistically impossible. Then he had this huge realization. Deep down in the unconscious, there's no reality tag. There's no way to tell a real memory from a powerfully charged fantasy. And this led him to a massive leap. What if the fantasy of seduction was actually more important than any real event? And here's the kicker. He noticed these fantasies almost always pointed back to the parents. So here he is. His career is in crisis, his biggest theory is in shambles, and what does he do? He does something completely radical, something unheard of.
The detective turns the investigation away from his patients and points the magnifying glass directly at himself.
He starts what he calls his self-analysis. The death of his own father seems to have been a major catalyst. So he begins this meticulous process of dissecting his own dreams, his earliest memories, his slips of the tongue. He basically turns himself into patient zero for a brand new investigation.
And the stuff he finds, it astonishes him. Digging through his own past, he uncovers this whole forgotten world of intense childhood feelings. He's recalling feelings about his mother, deep jealousy toward his infant brother who had passed away. He realizes, wow, this isn't just about what happens to you from the outside. This is about the powerful world of desire and rivalry that's happening inside you.
And as he digs deeper and deeper into his own mind, a new picture starts to form. Out of all this personal, messy, painful investigation, he starts to see a pattern. A pattern he believes isn't just about him, but about everyone. He thinks he's stumbled onto a fundamental law of being human.
Sure enough, just a few weeks after killing his old theory, he writes to Felice again with this incredible discovery. He says, and I'm quoting, "I have found in my own case too being in love with my mother and jealous of my father, and I now consider it a universal event of early childhood." And right there, that is the birth of his most famous and certainly most controversial idea.
And where does the name come from? Well, he calls this complex of feelings the Oedipus complex, after the Greek myth of Oedipus, the king who unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. Freud's argument was that the reason that ancient play is still so powerful is because it dramatizes a forbidden wish that exists deep down in all of us.
Now, this dramatic pivot, this turn from external reality to internal fantasy, would become one of the most fiercely debated moments in modern thought. I mean, was this a stroke of absolute genius, or was it a terrible, terrible mistake? The argument is still raging today.
Okay, so let's break down the two sides of the controversy. On one side, you've got critics who basically accuse Freud of losing his nerve. They argue that he discovered this awful truth about widespread child abuse, and then, in a cowardly move, invented the Oedipus complex to cover it all up. But then you have the more mainstream psychoanalytic view, which says, no, that's not it at all. They say Freud never denied that real abuse happens, but that his real genius was discovering that our inner world, our psychic reality, our fantasies can be just as formative and just as damaging as anything that happens in the outside world.
So where does that leave us today? Well, the modern understanding is, as you can imagine, a lot more nuanced. It's not an either-or question anymore. We now get that the lines are super blurry. A powerful fantasy can absolutely shape who you are, just like a real event. At the same time, a real trauma can have that delayed fuse effect that Freud first talked about. So very often, a patient is grappling with both powerful fantasies and real trauma. The difficult work of therapy, then, isn't about choosing a side, but about helping a person carefully untangle what belongs to the world outside and what belongs to the world within. And in the end, Freud's secret letters leave us with this giant question, one that's just as relevant today as it was over a century ago. Which has more power in shaping who we become? What happens to us, or what happens inside us?